Well, hello everyone. This is Dr. Jackalyn with DTP-Leadership Group, and this is Hot Topic Bold Talk. And I have a tremendous opportunity for y'all today because I have Shanti Gilbert on with me today. We've known each other since 1974, so we have a lot of things we can share with you. We're just going to start with this because we will probably be sharing things with you quarterly because we think there's so many things going on. But anyway, Shanti, why don't you introduce yourself? I'll introduce myself, and then we're going to start our conversation. How about that?
Okay, sure. So my name's Shanti, and I started life in New York, and I worked in education and higher education, and then in corporations in human resources, and had a formal training with 3 graduate degrees in counseling and social work and psychology. And you and I met at the National Training Labs, which was an amazing experience of how to work with groups and see ourselves in groups, personal growth, but also learning about how we can work together with people internationally. And then after working in that field and doing consulting and all kinds of things, I moved to Sedona, Arizona, and moved much more into my spiritual world. So I took a lot of those lessons and then had all kinds of spiritual teachings. I became a pipe carrier and a water pourer in lodges with native traditions. I became a priestess, then a high priestess, which was remembering who I was and the archetypes that I work with, especially the some of the Egyptian goddesses, etc. And then I also became an artist and worked in the glass field and learned a lot about energy work and healing. And so I took a lot of my ways of being with groups, and each place I've lived, I've built communities and worked with communities. So in Sedona, there was an amazing community of people that were similar ages, and we shared and got together and helped each other and supported and shared resources. I moved from Sedona, Arizona to Florida in 2009. And here there's a thriving community where we share Reiki. I have a women's drum circle that's been going on for 20 years monthly at new moon. I do something called Shift Happens, which is getting people that are in the field and on the path to gather and do a meditation and do action planning around ways to a safe space to really just feel and to be in their world. So I'm almost 75. I'm so happy, 3/4 of a century. And I feel vibrant. I feel healthy. And I know that in this age and stage, that takes up more time than used to, with eating healthy, exercising, getting dressed, doing dishes, etc., is a bigger piece of my life than felt like it was before, to just stay well and to be vibrant.
Thank you. I forgot all those degrees you have, and I'm so glad that you mentioned those because you have such a major background in education. So I think that's another thing that probably brought us together, because I really started professionally as a teacher, and I was a teacher in high school in Del Rio, Texas, and then I began to do counseling, and I had a undergraduate degree in government and sociology, and then a master's in counseling, and then a doctorate in counseling psychology. And so what happened with me and all those things through the years that we met each other at NTL, we were members of NTL for many, many years. I was for 25, and I learned so many things about how to get more connected with myself and to be able to be emotionally connected to the things that were really important in my life. Because I know that I was more a thinker than a feeler. And so I've really had to teach myself to feel as well as think and appreciate the emotional connection. Now you're more a feeler,
Right.
you do that. Yeah, you do that really well, Shanti. So I think I learned a lot from you about how the importance of really being emotionally connected to yourself. Now, I've done a lot of things in my life because I've been a entrepreneur for, this will be my 48th year. So I've been around for a very long time. I am happy to say that I am 82 and I will be moving to 83 in April. And I've never had a better time in my life. And I think people, one of the things I do is I fight a lot of issues around ageism. And I've been very much a part of a community of people that we work on cultural competency, diversity, and social justice. Now, I also have, I'm a master trained the leadership challenge, and there are many other things that I could list as certifications or things that I have. But I think the most important thing that we have to talk about today is we've spent years being friends with each other. And our greatest gift that we have to each other, I think, is that we are constantly self aware. And I have a friend that's written a new book on the ethical issues for entrepreneurs. And I think one of the things, Shanti, that I'm sure you would support is as entrepreneurs, we have to be ethical, and we can't be ethical if we're not self aware and growing every day of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is what is so important about it and about the relationship we have with each other. Um, and one of the things I think would be really important for us to talk about is the era that we came up in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you and I, you mentioned when we were visiting earlier that you've been to see the Bob Dylan movie. So have I. Since it's my music, my era, since I was in college in the 1960s, and then moved on in the 70s to professional life.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you talk to me about what you see in that era and how you think it has affected you, and then I'll do the same.
Sure. Okay. So a lot of things at that time, especially in the 60s and late 60s and 70s, was really about empowering yourself and speaking up against, with what there seemed to be a simple way to get your voice heard. There seemed to be a path to listen to and to share with each other. And I'd never seen so many people rise up and connect and be heard, and make a difference, because things changed in the planet. A lot was changing at that time. So there was chaos going on, yet we shared, maybe there were 3 TV channels, and there was not cell phones, and the music at that time were records. but things like the Beatles or Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, on and on and on, starting Frank Sinatra, we could relate. I mean, I was friendly globally. I had friends in other countries that were singing the Beatles songs. So even though we had different languages, we had the same language of those songs that we could share. And that was really special. It was hopeful. It was a time that I believed that having a voice and being active by whether it was walking, in a walk, or helping out and having groups to communicate what was going on and share change that way. I felt hopeful at that time. So.
Thank you. And one of the things that when I was watching the Bob Dylan movie this weekend, one of the things I saw was the folk music and the leaders of the folk music had such great messages, and they
Yes.
were calling out. It was like in the music was a protest of what was happening, and then we had to look at those issues. But I think that one of the things that we talked about earlier is before we started recording was that today it's much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the TV, but it's more complex today because social media is constantly inundating us with new opinions, new ideas, it can be conspiracy theories, it can be misinformation, it can be so many things. And it is, unless you listen to certain media, then you're never going to hear the truth or what is really going on in the world. If you're listening to certain media, you're going to have misinformation and things that are extreme distortions. So to me, what I appreciated when I was watching the movie was there, I can remember going to um gatherings for music and so forth. I remember you and I went
Right.
to some, yeah, we went. You'll have to remind me of that, but I know we went to a music concert
We went to
and
amazing concert, classical music. Were you there when it was, who was the conductor, famous conductor in New York? I can't remember, who wrote West Side Story, whatever.
yeah, well, I can't even
But
I can't even remember that now,
it
but I
was,
can remember another time that we went to a folk gathering
mhm,
somewhere in upper New York. And
mhm.
so I remember those times because I could, I was so emotionally present to the event, and the messages were so clear in the music about what people had difference of opinions of, that it was much easier to talk with those things. And I think it was a period, and when, if you disagreed, you could still talk with each other and not have hateful or violent comments being made about what you were saying or whatever else. And so I think today is a different world to live in.
Totally. 'Cause, yeah, I just, it was very easy to talk to whoever was there. There was never, I never thought to be looking, does somebody have a gun or somebody dangerous? I never felt that. I felt the community gathering, and that we might have had different points of view, but we were on the same page around listening to the messages and the music or sharing the time together. And that has changed so much. And just, again, not having cell phones, being able to just talk people to people, like when you went away, somebody might get upset that you didn't phone them, but you didn't have a phone around. You'd have to find a phone booth or something. And
Yeah.
so there was a level of being able to really be with your own feelings and not be inundated with all kinds of media, or taken away to be on your phone or be on your iPad or be, engaged in that kept pulling you. You could really have eye contact and talk to people and be involved in. And I agree with you with let's say there was disagreement. I don't remember anybody knocking anybody out unless they were like drunk or something. I don't
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
that being an issue ever, that came up in any of those kinds of gatherings. And how special a time that was. Yeah.
Right. And I think now that I look at it more and more, I know that the chaos that's going on has a lot to do with the political scene, not only the United States, but the world. And I think there is a shifting, and I, to me, chaos is something that is not the most pleasant thing to go through, because I don't know about you, but and I do know some of the things about what happened to you, but I'll just talk about it for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm old enough that I made a lot of mistakes in my earlier years and then had to learn from those to be able to be where I am today. And so I created chaos in my own life with some of the things I did. And whether it was drinking or whether it was doing business in ways that I think are not the most helpful, because I got over invested in
Mm-hmm.
people, and so I would do way more work than I needed to do, so I was exhausted, so then I would make mistakes, or I would do things out of reaction to something because I was so exhausted and having worked myself to death to try to solve the problems. um because I was a therapist for 18 years, and then I gave that up, and then I became a coach, and been an organizational development consultant my entire time. But I think one of the things that I do realize, and I is that when I made business decisions, sometimes they led to difficult consequences. And so some of those led to a business I had no longer existing. And
Mm-hmm.
I know today what those behaviors are because I'm in a different place today. I've spent a lot of time since 30 years ago when I made that era. I spent a lot of time working in recovery programs, doing a lot of training, doing a lot of things that have helped me to be aware of what those behaviors were, and I have changed those behaviors. So I think it gives me an added advantage to be able to deal with chaos. It's not something that I really enjoy and look at. I can deal with it. And that's something we probably can talk about in a moment. But that's one of the times, Shanti, that I can think of where I really created a lot of chaos in my life, because I spent 14 years being in a very difficult situation.
You just got
Yeah.
frozen.
And I spent it was spent 14 years being in a difficult situation, and I know sometimes the film will freeze and we'll just keep going.
Okay.
But anyway, I think it was a very worthwhile thing for me to go through all those experiences, even though they were painful at times.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about what you experienced.
Well, I think also for me too that I really value the fact that not only did I go into a field that helps others to look at themselves, but part of that for me to feel authentic was to really take a lot of time to look at myself. And I don't think I really grew up in the sense of taking responsibility for myself in my life without blaming others and looking for excuses until my late 30s with help, because all of a sudden I realized that I was making stories up that I didn't have any data for about my parents or about situations. And I think so I also didn't make the best decisions in partners and the best decisions in friends, and therefore had more pain than I would have liked to live with. But I think once I woke up, and when I say wake up, I think that all the feelings opened in my body, so that instead of being like in denial or frozen about feelings and just acting where I was not 100% engaged from my heart and my mind, and my belly, even, just the body being connected to that I don't think I made decisions for myself or for the world. I think I made decisions reactively. And so it took life experience and helpers and support and a real desire to be authentic that helped me to get to that place. And then with that was a different way of making decisions and working in the world. Like, I really believe 40s on was learning, how can I serve? How can I serve? How can I be a person that I value? How can I be healthy? How can I have fun? How can I be successful? And how can I engage with people to serve them so they can have joy in their lives and peace in their lives and health in their lives as well?
Thank you. And let me go ahead and do that. And I will say something. You got frozen a little bit there, but it doesn't matter, because your message is very powerful, and it's the thing that I appreciate about you. I support what you're saying. I think it took, I have to face something about myself, and that is I was sometimes very stubborn and resistant to change. And I thought I knew better what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went through the NTL experiences, then I started through the Advanced Personal Growth Lab where we met, and those kind of things. I had to start facing who I was, what my belief systems were, what were my attitudes. And so the music at the time really challenged me to look at things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And as the years have gone on with the recovery programs I've done, then working through the steps and really looking at doing very in-depth inventories and then making amends to people for the behavior I did, it really transformed and changed who I was and who I am today. And so one of the things I'd like to say is, I think you and I both have messages to people that are in difficult situations that it doesn't have to be, I'll admit, for 14 years, I was very depressed, and I had to really work through a lot of issues and ask for professional help and got it. And I had a wonderful psychologist and a wonderful psychiatrist I worked with for all
Mhm.
those 14 years. And I did that because I'm smart enough to realize that if I'm going to be working with other people, I have to straighten my own self out.
Right.
And I think that's what you did. Now, what I'd like for you to do is tell more about what happened in the Native American community that you became so much a part of, and how it transformed you
Okay.
progressively so you could deal with difficult situations.
Well, I've always had, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs and not really part of indigenous anything. It was pretty much a white community in Long Island at that time. And so, but I was always fascinated with indigenous of any culture all over the planet. I mean, I just really I love nature, and I really believe that there were healing ways that could happen from the food you eat and from the teas or from what grew in the land. So I've just always been very, very curious. And I also, from that, I think I liked to be simple myself. I like that simplicity of nature. And so I was always drawn wherever I went and traveled. I've traveled the world to the cultures to learn how did the Maasai work together to keep their health? How did they work with their spirit? How did I met the medicine man in South Africa? In a tribe in one of the villages, and all over the world, in South America, in the Amazon, etc. And what and I feel like when I've gone to any of these things, I feel like they see me as well, that they see like a similar spirit. And so just trying to answer your question and repeat it again because I moved into that.
No, but I think what you're talking about, what you're really talking about is what you learned in all these various indigenous
Yes.
groups that you went into. And so
Yes.
what I'm really asking you to do is to tell me how what happened in Sedona, or what happened
Right.
in
Okay.
another country or
So
whatever that impacted you. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things in the Sedona, we had a couple-year process with a lot of people from different tribes would come, because there's ley lines in the area, and there's 10 areas within the place that we'd have ceremony at each of those ley lines to kind of open up to spirit and to ask for information from the land, or from if spirit would come through. And so I learned to get quiet. I think I learned to listen, as opposed, and I'm very extroverted, so I like to talk a lot. Not so easy for me, but learning to really trust nature, trust the animals, trust them to know things, to take the time to listen. And so ways that you could do it, something like a sweat lodge, which was a way to be by a fire and have stones put in, and each round of it, you're heated up and you're sweating, but it's also bringing up information in each of the directions of what's going on for you. So I think it's about listening, but it's also having a place that you can have a voice. And so those were places that I got tribally. And when I think about my drum circle here, we're not Native American, but we use some traditions of songs and ways, and basically because women gathered and they would have the red tent early years, or they'd get together when they were on their moon time, their bleeding times, and have a voice and be able to be heard and listen to each other and make decisions and support each other. And I think those ways are really deeply ingrained in me. And so what I've done where I live in the last number of years is create that safe space that other people can feel okay to share. And I think that's one of the ways, as we move from chaos, the thing we're talking about, is to make room for that, so people feel safe, that they can share if they're fearful or angry or other things, but have a voice and not feel frightened that speaking it is going to be punishment for them in some ways. Yeah. And also
Well, and I appreciate,
yeah,
yeah.
have tools. So the drum is an amazing tool to sing songs and to just have the rhythm of it. Find the tools that you can hear your own heartbeat, that you can get quiet with yourself. And I call it hollow bone, where the Beasley brain is not going. And so you're open to all the information coming in, and you're not necessarily having to judge, critique, put up all kinds of boundaries around yourself. So
Thank you. And that brings me, and I think it's so fascinating because the world you've just described, I've done it in a different way, and yet both are extremely valuable. Because what I've done is I've gone into the world of saying, okay, I'll have weekend experiences and teach and really encourage people to process through their feelings and stop reacting to what's going on in their world and start getting centered within themselves. And as they process their feelings and have someone sit with them that talks to them, after they finish their process, then they have a chance to truly take the time to go in and find out what's going on with themselves. And so the weekend experiences have been a way of living in the process. And I'm very thankful to Ann Wilson Shea because she started that whole process. I've changed it in many ways to adapt to what I believe it is important to do, but it's a process in where you do something to have a voice and to also address the habitual patterns you have that are destroying your ability to be the most powerful essence of yourself. The other thing that I think is another thing that I've done to give people a voice is to go into organizations as an organizational development consultant and not just do cultural competency and diversity and social justice work, but also to go in and teach the Leadership Challenge, which I think is one of the best research leadership programs in the world. But I teach people to have a voice. And I think back to going to a court system, and I walked in and they'd never had a voice. And I was invited in by a woman that I highly respect. And she was the new leader of that organization. And she said, they've never been trained even to communicate with each other. And so we started, and in several years period, we had people knowing that if it was really important, they could come to the deputy director's office and speak, or they could come to the executive team and speak because they had issues that they thought the executive team really needed to hear and address. And so we started developing a really inclusive organization that included, it didn't matter what race, what sexual orientation you were, what gender you were, it didn't matter those things, even though those things are important to learn about so we can appreciate the differences we have and how we need to be respectful to each other. But it brought a place where people could really come and speak and do things. And I remember one of the most striking things that happened to me. There was this 6'6" guy. I'm 5'4", so there was this 6'6" guy that came up to me, and he had been in a very short program with me. And he said, I heard about that leadership program. Can I be in that? And I was training most of the people that were at different levels from him. And I said, I don't know. I will go speak to the deputy director. And she and I talked about it. So we started training people at all levels of the organization to have the understanding that no one in an organization is anything but a leader. What, it doesn't matter what your position is, you are leading, because if you don't lead your desk, somebody in the next desk is going to have a problem. And so we started doing the thing you're talking about you've done, which was to teach people that you do have a voice. And it comes from in our era that we were talking about Bob Dylan, because that era was one in which we all learned and started to have voices that we hadn't had before, particularly, it depended on women, and then it became persons of color and many other things. So to me, the quality of the voice and the kind of voice that we have is something that concerns me about the present day world. Because the voice I see now is one in which there's so many accusations before we even get to the conversation. So I'd
Right.
love to hear your opinion on that one.
I'm with you, because I think with part and parcel with having a voice is being witnessed with your voice, not just to have the voice, and that means taking the time to interact. And I think that's something we've lost with social media, and also once news used to be an hour a day. It wasn't 24/7 that was marketed to the world, and so there used to be a place to capture that and to witness that. It's harder to witness when it's coming at you from every end and all the time. It's tougher for people, I agree, to not jump to a conclusion from something they've already heard, and therefore the listening and the witnessing has gone to the background. And so I think that's what makes for a lot of chaos. And I think the thing that's more sad is the hopelessness, that there's more hopelessness that I've seen. I even feel it. And again, I don't know if it's my aging process. I'm hopeful day to day and I'm happy in my world. But I used to have a dream that I'd see peace in the world, and that would happen, and I'd have a say in making that happen, or I'd have some influence. I don't feel that anymore. And that I'm not gone with it in the sense that I'm still doing groups and still wanting to. I feel the best approach to that is to help people be okay with themselves. And therefore, whatever way they need to give their voice and make their mark, then they can do that in a way if they come. And also, I think love is important, and kindness are important values that I have, that I would like. And I agree with you that I don't see that in the media. I don't see that in the politics right now. I don't, either side. I mean, I just think that there's accusations being thrown at each other, rather than taking the time to listen to actually what somebody wants to say.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that I realize now is that the reason I've done so much cultural competency, diversity, and social justice work is because I wanted to create environments where we had difference of opinion that we could talk.
Right.
And I've come to the realization after what happened in the last election that the thing that I think needs to be done most is for me to seek out people that may have the same position as I do, but may have different ideas about how we can build a different world in which we can communicate again. But then I'm going to reach out to those that I know that have different opinions of mine and learn from them. And one of the things that I think is really important when we do that is we have to all learn how to set guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you the reasons for that. Because if I'm going to sit with somebody that has a different opinion from mine, I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to be labeled. And I don't want to be doing that to that other person.
Right.
And it's a matter of what we've been talking about, that over the years, I've become so emotionally present with myself that most of the time, maybe once or twice a year, I really blow it. But most of the time, I can calm myself down enough to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I've attempted it in the past with some, and there are some people that it's impossible to do that with.
Right.
But I think there are many of us in the world that can sit down and talk with each other. So one of the things I'm going to do is, I know someone that I know at least two people I'm going to start with this year and say, let's sit down and have conversations periodically. Because no matter whether our views are different or not, we have to find a way to communicate with each other so we can build something that will allow us then to come to agreement about how we're going to deal with the violence, how we're going to deal with the hatred and things that exist. And it's not by feeding people's anger.
Right.
It's not by feeding people's depression. It's by feeding them and saying, let's talk about these things. Let's look at what the possibilities are for really resolving issues. And if we can do it between each other, then maybe we can do it at a larger scale. And that's what I think we're talking about here.
I agree.
And go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I think that's a great approach. I agree with you with that. And I think that's a wonderful commitment to find at least a couple people that have different point of view to make sure that you're going to engage in that, so that you can do that yourself. So you're modeling it, for yourself, which I think is
Right.
wonderful. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
in.
And I think, yeah. And Shanti, I think that another thing I didn't mention clearly enough that I'd like to be sure I do is one of the things I say when I start one of these conversations, because I have had some, and I still have some with individuals that have different points of view because they're willing to do it. But I say, the first thing I want is for us to be respectful. The second thing is, if we get into a conversation where, it could be heated, let's decide whether we're going to continue the conversation or maybe we need to process our feelings and come back to it tomorrow, the next day. But let us make certain that we're going to establish certain things, that I'll be honest, I'll be straightforward with respect, and that I will do my best to not only share what I have to offer, but I will also listen to what you have to offer. And if necessary, I will repeat or rephrase what you've said to be sure I've heard it, so I can take care of myself to be respectful to you as well as you to me. So those are some of the things that I think are really important.
I think it's a great model. And you know what? We learned this in the late 60s, 70s. And I'm still with that. I still believe in those ways because I just remember the outcomes that we saw with people over that time. And the outcome for myself, not only in self growth, but in friendships like ours, that began because we communicated, because we looked and saw and talked and listened but also made it. I think part of making the safe space is having some guidelines, boundaries of how you're going to go ahead and do that. And I think that's a great idea, Jackalyn.
Thank you. And I've really appreciated this today. And, I think one of the things that we've done is we've shown what we've done in our lives in a very brief discussion, because there are many other things that I can think of that I can laugh about, or we can laugh about, and really share about how we handled situations and how we learned to do that. So I think it's important for us, at least quarterly, to provide, my audience with Hot Topic Bold Talk, to be able to hear what we're saying, because I think there are going to be times in the next years that there are going to be major challenges. And I think we have a lot of things we can say to really do that. And, one of the things I'd say too is people have to have the depth of love that we have for each other and
Mm-hmm.
respect,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know.
And
And
I value the
when
wisdom.
I love someone, I can hear them. Go ahead.
No, and also the wisdom that's gathered over just living on the planet, consciously being able to live not just the years unconsciously, but making a commitment to have some process, some way to understand your own behaviors and how they impact, and know what you desire to keep going forward and how to get to love. How is
Yeah.
it that you get to love, and what's important for you in the ways that you love. So I agree. I think this is terrific, and we should continue meeting like this.
Thank you. And I just want to stop the recording. So give me just a moment and let me do